friends, and welcome back to Wise Woman Rising. I'm Shallee MacArthur, and I'm really excited to have you here. So today we are going to be talking about a couple of different things. We're going to be focusing on the transformative power of women's stories, and I'm going to be sharing with you a story of a goddess, of a Celtic goddess. So let's dive right in. Sue Monk Kidd, whose book I told you I'm going to be quoting a lot, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. In that she said, "The female soul is no small thing. Neither is a woman's right to define the sacred from a woman's perspective. What happens to a female when all her life she hears sacred language indirectly, filtered through male terms? What goes on deep inside her when decade after decade she must translate from male experience into female experience and then apply the message to herself? We've been excluded from creating symbol and myth, from the meaning-making process that explains and interprets reality. As humans, we are meaning-making machines. Part of what actually just makes us human is to find meaning out of sequences of random experiences in our lives and to come to understand ourselves and the world around us. It's part of why story is so vital to our very well-being. The way that we perceive life is literally in story form. And we are the storytellers of our own lives. And our own stories are influenced by stories we hear most frequently. So when we only hear stories and myths and symbols from a male perspective, as women, we recognize, even subconsciously, that we're missing from this understanding of the world. That is both alienating and psychologically damaging. Our inability to be in and to contribute to an overarching human story is deeply soul wounding. Much of the time, out of innate human need, we kind of shoehorn ourselves into the sacred in male stories so that we feel like we have a place, even when that place is incidental or secondary or even demeaning. We kind of cling really desperately to that story, even though it doesn't fit us. Because if we let it go, we don't know where we belong in a universe that's so vast and kind of random. And it's why so many of us really cling and support so fiercely to patriarchy and the vast world myth. And by patriarchy, I mean a world that is shaped by a distorted view of maleness. And that's usually the only story that we know, and the only one we even know how to tell ourselves. And so for us as women to be able to pry our fingers off of that mythology, we need to start by hearing stories of other women, other mortal women, divine women, and all the women in between. We need to own our place in the stories of sacredness. Story is a tool. It's something that as humans we use to unify, to connect, to bond, and to heal. We can use the imagination to weave together a coherent narrative about things in the world that don't make sense. And believe it or not, we even release hormones like oxytocin and cortisol when we hear stories and when we tell stories. And that increases things like memory. It helps promote a healthy stress response. It brings about healing and gives us happiness. That's even actually got a name in psychology and medicine, and it's known as narrative medicine. So story is a really powerful way to organize thought and to give meaning to chaotic and confusing experiences by using our imagination to fill in the blanks. So in religion, much of those blanks have been filled in already for us by men. And we women need to be able to do that too for ourselves, to fill in our own blanks. And I'm going to give you a link that goes into just a little bit more detail about some of that down below from a Native American's perspective, and it's really beautiful. So we're going to begin that journey together on this channel. And we're going to have kind of a sacred woman story time where I will share myths of sacred women and goddesses from around the world. Those videos will be part of the Sagalund series. So saga is a Swedish word that means story, but it's not just any story. It's kind of a grand tale. It blends fact and legend and narrative and poetry, and it combines both factual, artistic, and spiritual truth into one giant, whole, beautiful saga. And Saga was also, incidentally, the Norse goddess of poetry, history, and wisdom. And she was sometimes known as the Seeing One, which is super cool. So the second half of the word Sagalund is lund, which is Swedish for grove, like a grove of trees. And in ancient times, groves were places of sacredness and worship. So Sagalund is a virtual sacred feminine space to find truth and wisdom in story. I'll be posting videos, of course, about other facets of the divine feminine as well, so they'll kind of be spread throughout. And I'll be telling some stories that might be new to you or not. We'll be breaking them down to examine them, but I also plan to break down and rewrite some of the common religious male-centric stories to see how we can view them from a divine feminine perspective. And I'll be sharing some history about them that indicates that that perspective might not actually be too far from reality. So then after we've kind of inundated ourselves with stories of divine women and have a sacred place inside us where those stories can live, I'm going to be doing a second series where we will learn a process to rewrite our own stories, which is the stories we tell ourselves about life, which is known as personal mythology. So for today, we're going to start with a goddess you probably never heard of. She is called, let's see if I can pronounce this right, the Cailleach. Cailleach, I got it, which is Gaelic. And so you can see the spelling, it's nothing like it sounds. So in Gaelic mythology, which is Irish, Scottish, and Manx, the Cailleach is an old woman deity. She's said to be the mother of all the gods and goddesses. She's a creatrix. She breaks down the land into valleys and builds up mountains as her stepping stones with her sacred hammer. To rule the land she has created, any leader must gain her approval. Her sacred hammer allows her to control the winds, the cold weather, and wild winter storms, and she is known as the Queen of Winter. Her name literally means old woman or hag, coming from the Old Gaelic word for veiled one, and is part of several other words, which includes the word for owl, which is translated as old woman of the night, and the word they use for a wise woman. She's depicted as a veiled woman peeking out with one eye, her skin deathly pale, and her hair white. She leaps across mountains and rides storms. She's a shapeshifter capable of transforming into a giant bird. She's not good and she's not evil. She's nature, wild and savage, and beautiful and bountiful and destructive and renewing. In the winter months, she never ages and never dies. Each year she returns on October 31st, which is Samhain, the Celtic end of year and beginning of winter. From then, she rules the winter months. At this time, she lets the land rest, raises winter storms, and cares for the animals that are under her protection. She herds the deer and is a patron of wolves emboldened by their winter hunger. On the 1st of February, she goes about seeking firewood to last her the rest of the winter. If she wakes early on that day, she will ensure it is sunny so she can gather wood to make her winter last just a little longer. But if the weather is foul, then the Cailleach has slept too long and will not be able to gather her firewood, so the winter must end soon. As spring approaches, the Cailleach gives way, and on Beltane, the 1st of May, she cedes her rule to Brizia, or Brigid, the goddess of spring, and turns to stone to await her time again at the end of the year. Centuries ago, a medieval poem was written in Ireland called The Lament of the Hag of Beara. In it, she laments the ebb of her life, unhappy with her age and waning power, remembering better days when she drank wine with kings instead of praying with shriveled old hags. This, however, is a story that paints her as bitter, as wishing away her fellow women, and instead longing to be virile and young and connected with powerful men. It's a story from a male gaze, where a woman's worth has faded in his mind. This is not a story where she embraces her wisdom, builds her own queendom, and protects and cares for her own. There is, in fact, an enormous stone in Ireland called the Hag of Beara, and I'm going to share with you a poem by Susan Elizabeth Howe, and I'll put a link to that as well, that paints instead the Cailleach, the Hag of Beara, as a divine woman, a wise woman, someone for women to look to, ready to share with her fellow women what she knows. She sits on her haunches, arms resting on her knees, a shawl about her, made of whatever you see, cloud, sheepskin, rough-spun wool, draped seaweed. She watches the town, the bony hills, Mishkish behind them, the bay waves frothing to escape, watches the moon rising or the sun. Salt-coated eyelashes sometimes alter what she sees. No wave breaking can move her, no hurricane. Winds that blow gulls onto the cliffs she scarcely feels. But the suffering, so heavy. Only granite could bear it. She's become granite. To see the wounded wander the world, hiding their shame. She already knows, has seen them crossing deserts, oceans, and years, hoping to rest their foreheads against her shoulder. No magic, not her deepest fiery touch, can stop the black crows pecking at their liver and their heart. You are without worth, too stupid to live, impossible that you should have dignity, should have a home, unforgivable the shame you bear. She cannot unsee what the broken show her, might ask why, make them see more, but she offers her gift. I am like you, she says. What happened to you, happened to me. What you've done, I've done. Touch the crags of my face to feel how I love you. Earth love, bedrock, permanent love. After, the pilgrims turn back, find the road to Castletown Bear and Ardgroom. Some wash themselves in the sea, slough off her touch. Most carry her, though she won't leave her cliff, with them along the twisting, narrow roads. I hope this image of a sacred woman has connected with you and maybe connected you to something inside yourself. As Sue Monk Kidd has said, to reconnect with our souls, we need to claim the freedom and power to shed our conditioning, to tear out the stitches from old fabric, and to define for ourselves who we are as women, what is sacred, and how we relate to sacred experience. When we finally do that, we will weave new lives and a new era. We will take back our souls once and for all. I look forward to weaving more stories and new lives and a new era with all of you. And as always, in the words of Sue, take what seems yours to take and leave the rest. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, friends, and goodbye.